think by now we've all gathered that the Democrats are kind of out of touch with everyday folks. And they're also out of touch with a lot of Hispanics and Latinos that they claim to be fighting for. I mean, that's been pretty evident over and over and over again. But now it's on full display in a way that I don't think anybody really anticipated. That's because Dr. Jill Biden said something that, some people just were kind of offended by. A lot of Hispanics were offended by. In fact, Hispanic communities are now coming out and telling the world how offended they are by her comments. We're going to play her comments as well as everyone's reaction, as well as what her office is now saying about these comments coming up. But my gosh, I mean, talking about stepping in it in a major way, I think it speaks to something much larger, which is that the Democrats really are losing the Latino, Hispanic vote. And that's good. You know what? That's good for the country because it's going to force the most extremists on the left to come back to the center, which is healthy. All right, I'm going to play you this clip. Welcome, everyone, to the show. I'm Trish. Do me a favor. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, on Rumble, on Facebook, on Apple iTunes for the full audio version of this podcast, as well as Spotify. It's great to have you here. Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals than right now. So go to legacypminvestments.com for more. Again, that's legacypminvestments.com. I want to play you this sound, and then we're going to unpack it and talk about it because, well, it's just really something to see and to hear. Here we go. This is Jill Biden speaking in San Antonio, Texas.
Diversity of this community, as distinct as the Bogotas of the Bronx, as beautiful as the blossoms of Miami, and as unique as the breakfast tacos here in San Antonio, is your strength.
That's courtesy, by the way, of our friends over at the Media Research Center. We are not tacos. That was the response from the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And it's a good response. I mean, I don't think anybody really appreciates getting their entire heritage boiled down to one kind of food product. I mean, I'm Irish, right? And, when people go on and on about the green beer, it can get a little annoying. So I understand where they're coming from. I also understand that everybody's super hypersensitive right now, but that's in part because of the left's doing. So you'd think of all people, right? The speechwriters for the First Lady of the United States, for the Democrat Party, that they would know better, that they of all people would not be trying to compare human beings to food products like tacos. Anyway, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists also said, and I quote, "Our heritage as Latinos is shaped by various diasporas, cultures, and food traditions. Do not reduce us to stereotypes." Pretty good. I think it's a good response, and I think it's important for those in the Democrat Party to remember that. I'll tell you, if it was the other way around, you know how quickly people would be jumping all over a Republican that said this? Actually, Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, had a great tweet. He changed his Twitter picture to a taco. It's actually, it's like unbelievable. I mean, who are these speechwriters anyway that are coming up with this material? I want to point out that, of course, Republicans jumped on this very, very quickly, from Marco Rubio changing his picture to the taco to the Republican National Hispanic Assembly, which said, and I quote, "The First Lady's comments yesterday comparing Hispanic people to tacos shows yet again Democrats' low regard for our people. She reduced us to a caricature, a stereotype. Mrs. Biden demonstrated yet again why Hispanics are leaving the Democrat Party in huge numbers. We have little patience for a party that treats us as helpless victims. Who looks to us as little more than a reliable voting bloc." That's spot on. It's spot on because I'll tell you, that is the mistake the Democrats keep making. They just assume that this voting bloc is going to go along with them because they, quote unquote, stand up for minorities. But I would just point out that in all these minority communities that they are allegedly standing up for, you have higher rates of crime. You do have higher rates of poverty. You have a more challenging economic situation and a scholastic situation, right? The education, frankly, is not the same. And at some point, I think when push comes to shove, a lot of Latinos and Hispanics, hardworking people that are coming to this country for a better life, they're like, wait a second, this isn't working for us. You know what? We want police on the streets. We actually want a border. That's a very interesting thing when you talk to people that have come here and they've gone through the process of making sure that they're here legally. It's very difficult for them in their communities to have a lot of people that are not here legally. One, it reduces wages. Two, it makes it more challenging just from a safety perspective in their view. And so I get it. Like, I understand it. So people that are here as US citizens now that are Hispanic or Latino, they are saying, okay, enough is enough. And what you have witnessed in recent years is a continued migration out of the Democrat Party and into the Republican Party. And you think about, for example, Texas's 34th district, the 34th district, primarily Hispanic, and they had always had, a blue guy in Congress. And what do you know? They elected Congresswoman Flores, a conservative Republican, because they're like, okay, we're over it. You know what? They care about the same things that everybody else does. Inflation, the safety of their children, to education. I mean, these are kind of universal topics. And I think people are sick and tired of getting lumped into a big group and maybe being compared to tacos. I mean, it's nuts. By the way, I should point out that Jill Biden's office has issued an apology, and not actually her, it was the spokesperson, Michael LaRosa, who said, quote, "The First Lady apologizes that her words were conveyed anything but pure admiration and love for the Latino community." In other words, she was meaning to be positive and it was misconstrued. Again, I'll go back to the bigger issue, which is really what's at the heart of this. And that's that Hispanics want to be recognized as individuals that have the same concerns as everyone else. And when you try and lump them into something and just say, okay, this is what you are, they're gonna rebel against that, as they should. And I think this is going to be very costly to the Democrat Party as we go into 2024, certainly this fall as well. That's the reality of the situation. We've got a lot of other news to get to. For example, guess what? Breaking news. Twitter is suing Elon Musk. I'm not surprised here. I told you they would. They issued a letter suggesting they would, and now it's official. They're lawyering up, and I'll tell you this, they get a really good shot. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we do, a quick word from one of our great sponsors at Key City Capital. KeyCityCapital.com/Trish is the website to go to. You may have seen Charlie Domback on the show on Monday. He was talking about different ways that you can invest right now given the inflation, and he's got a lot of really interesting ideas, including, for example, real estate investments, where you get a rate of return, where you get the appreciation, as well as some tax benefits. And then, he had some other interesting stuff. I do encourage you to watch Monday's program, because he had a portfolio, for example, of cars where they fix them up and they sell them again, and there's a pretty significant rate of return between 9 and 12% on that portfolio. So just interesting ways to think about the market right now. I think the reality is inflation is going to be with us for a while, and consequently the Fed is going to have to continue being very, very aggressive to try and rein it in. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the equity markets? It means it's going to be more challenging. So give Charlie a call. Go to KeyCityCapital.com/Trish for more. Back to Twitter right now. I guess this is the stock to buy, or it was anyway, both on a Friday and then going into Monday, as we got word that Elon was just bailing on the whole deal, because, as I told you, he can't really just bail on it. Like, there's a signed contract, and the Delaware courts are pretty strict about these things like material adverse change or material adverse effect. He's going to have to somehow prove it. And look, I mean, hey, maybe that's his goal. Maybe he just wants to take down the companies. Like, if I have to spend $44 billion or a ton in legal fees, whatever it is, I'll do it. But all that said, it's going to be pretty tricky. In other words, he might just still ultimately be on the hook for all this money. Maybe he negotiates a lower price. I mean, there could be a situation where the board's like, enough, we can't take it anymore. We just want the guy gone. Look, LVMH and Tiffany, they were able to come to a deal. LVMH was buying Tiffany, and it happened during 2020, and the economy had completely tanked. And so consequently, LVMH said, hey, we don't want to pay as much. And Tiffany agreed to it. And they didn't really have to, but I think they just didn't want to spend all that time in court. The question is, does Twitter want to spend all that time in court? They may say, hey, sure, what else? We got nothing to lose. So watch that very, very carefully. We saw as the news came out in after hours trading that the stock traded higher, and you would have seen in Tuesday's trading as well that it traded higher. I think because people are coming to the realization now that they've read the merger agreement, as I have, that he doesn't quite have a clear path here. And don't forget, as I said, a MAC or material adverse effect, extremely, extremely rare. I mean, I can think of only one incident where that actually happened, and the deal was completely blown up as a result. So watch Twitter, continue doing that. And then, of course, watch for these inflation numbers this week. Again, I think it comes back to it's the economy is stupid, which is why the Democrats are so failing in that they don't recognize that Hispanic Americans, like everybody else, care about things like the economy. And when you have this much inflation and you have an administration that is seemingly so out of touch with it, people are like, okay, we're done. It's over. I told you yesterday, the new polls are suggesting that Democrats aren't going to go for Joe Biden running again in 2024. And can you blame them? Anyway, quick reminder, make sure you subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the full audio version of this podcast, and I'll see you right back here again tomorrow.